Okay, I have my pattern pieces cut for our pocket sample. I cut one of the small pocket, one of the large pocket. And how this works for our sample is the smaller pocket is going to be the actual pocket on our sample, and the large pocket piece forms the backing. So here's what it looks like once it's totally done. And so the very first step, we're going to work on this inner hem of the top part of the pocket. So your very first step is we're going to remove this large piece, because we're just working off of this one. So if I want the top of my pocket to be here, we're going to take our seam gauge and you're going to turn it under once at 1/4 inch. So using your seam gauge, you're going to find the second small line here. 1, 2, that's 2/8, which reduces down to 1/4 inch. And then according to the directions, you're going to turn the raw edge under at 1/4 inch towards the wrong side. So my fabric does have a right side and a wrong side. And so I'm going to turn it in towards the wrong side at about 1/4 inch. So as you're doing this, you want to measure just to make sure it's accurate. And as you're holding it in place with your fingers, grab the iron and just run it along the pressed edge. Okay, next you're going to do this once more. So using the same 1/4 inch measurement, you're going to turn it one more time towards the wrong side at the exact same 1/4 inch measurement. So I'm going to measure this and press it. So I have this nicely pressed now. Now I want to secure it down with 2 pins. So I'm going to put my pin right in through this flap here, just to keep it from moving as I sew it. Okay, so there are my 2 pins. And then now, according to your directions, it does say to edge stitch along the turned under edge. So this is a really narrow folded edge here. So I'm just going to position my presser foot. Let me zoom in a bit so you can see better. I'm going to position my presser foot so that the needle is right in the middle of this folded edge. Okay, because I want to secure this down. So position it like so. You can kind of just eyeball it. A good way to do it is if you want to just put the folded edge here along this inner edge of this presser foot. And then we're going to take a standard stitch and just sew all the way down, back stitching at the beginning and the end of the seam. Get down to the bottom, go ahead and back stitch it. And then you can remove it from your machine. The next step has us back at the iron. What we're going to do here is we're going to turn the hem edge to the right side, like so, and this measurement should be at 1 inch. So using your seam gauge, find 1 inch, and this is turned towards the right side. You're going to measure this. Make sure it's even all the way across at 1 inch. And then press this. After you've pressed this, go ahead and put 2 pins in there just to secure it so it doesn't unflap. I'll put 1 in on that left side and then 1 on the right side. The next step is to stay stitch these 3 sides. And what stay stitching does is it forms an outline so that we know where exactly to turn under when we turn these edges towards the inside later on. Okay, so this is going to be done at 4/8 or 1/2 inch. And just a hint, if you're not sure where to pivot when you reach the bottom here, you can take your seam gauge, find a 1/2 inch, which is right in the center here. That's also equivalent to 4/8. And then from the bottom edge of my fabric, right here, I can just make a little mark. And that tells me that this is exactly where I need to pivot. So as I'm starting here, you're gonna go down, you're gonna leave your needle in, lift up the presser foot and pivot to this side. You're gonna sew 4/8 down this way, and then let's mark 1/2 inch here as well so we know exactly where to stop. So once I hit about this line here, I'm gonna leave my needle in, lift up my presser foot and pivot to here, sew 4/8 until I reach the top folded edge here, and you're gonna backstitch. So there should be backstitching here and here. Okay, so let me go ahead and set this in my machine. And I'm gonna zoom in here so you can see where I'm positioning it, so you can see where the 4/8 is. Okay, so on our machine, we've seen 5/8, and so the line right before it will be 4/8, which is equivalent to 1/2 inch. Okay, so that's the line between the 3/8 and the 5/8. You're gonna position it right over there, and I'm starting at my upper right-hand side. Okay, so align it with 4/8, lower your presser foot so it's aligned to the top edge of your fabric. With this stitch, you are going to backstitch it. So backstitch up to the top, go back down. And I'm gonna look out for this marking I put there. That's going to be my stopping point before I pivot. If you wanna get more control, you can always turn the hand wheel. I think I'm about there, so I'm gonna leave my needle in, lift up the presser foot and take a peek, and I'm right there at the 1/2 inch mark. So now I'm gonna turn it. And this should line up with that 4/8 stitch plate line, okay? All the way down until you hit this other mark here. And turn my hand wheel. I think I'm about there, so I'll leave my needle in, presser foot up, and turn. It looks like I'm still at 5/8, so it looks like I could go one more stitch. There we go. So we're gonna sew it back to the top here, move my pin as I go. And when I reach the top, you do want to backstitch this. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Stitching starting here, backstitched, pivot, pivot, back up to here with a backstitch. The next step is to reduce the bulk in your corners. So using your shears, we're going to cut at a 45-degree angle. Do not cut past your stitching line though. Just right up to the stitching line, just like this. Do this on the 2 bottom corners. This just helps to reduce bulk when we turn these edges over towards the inside. Okay, when you're at the top here, we're just trimming it off. Do not cut beyond the stitching line, otherwise you end up with a hole in your pocket. So just up until the stitching line there, and then here as well. Okay, so I have my 4 corners trimmed, right here and down here. Notice that my stitching line is still intact, I can still see it. Next, you're gonna turn the folded edge out and point the corners out. So with your fingers, you can go ahead and turn it, like so. And then you do want these corners to be totally pointed. If they are not pointed, you can actually use the end of your seam gauge actually has this, and this is actually used to point your corners out. So you can turn this over, and then using this tip here, you can push your corners out so they're nice and pointy. Okay, so we're back at the iron now. Now we're going to press it along the stay stitching line. So first, let's start with our top edge, which we've already turned towards the right side. Corners pointed. We're just gonna iron this down, keeping it at an inch in width. Okay, next we're gonna go ahead and press under these 3 sides. You guys already stitched your stay stitching line, so we're going to use that as a guideline for pressing. So my tip with this is just press it along the stay stitching line, but I want to keep the stay stitching line just a hair inside the fold. So that way when you turn your pocket to the right side, you don't see any stitching on this side. Okay, so you can see a little bit of my stitching here along the edge. Okay, the purpose of that previous step where we trim the corners was because right now when we turn this over, by reducing the bulk here, it just makes it so it's less lumpy and lays a lot flatter at the corners. Okay, after you've pressed it, your pocket should be nice and flat. You're almost done. It just needs to be attached to the backing now. And so here's what your pocket will look like on the right side, this being the top edge, because when you turn it over, you can see that the pocket hem we created was right at the top. After our pocket has been nicely pressed along these 3 sides, and the top pocket hem is pressed along the top edge here, you're going to take it and then now attach it to your pocket backing, which is the large pocket pattern that you cut out. So this being the top of your pocket, I'm just going to flip it around. And we do want this pocket to be placed evenly along your backing. So you can roughly lay it out, and then I'll take my seam gauge just to measure, just to make sure that it's even along the top edge and along one of the side edges, so it's not placed on there crooked. So from here I'm going to measure, and it should be the same distance here. And then this distance, I'm going to go ahead and measure this, and it should be the same as down here. Okay, so all looks good. Now go ahead and attach it to your pocket backing by pinning it. Being careful not to shift it as you're pinning it. You do want to get quite a few pins in here so that it doesn't move as you're sewing. Because the telltale sign of a homemade project is if your pocket ends up crooked on your tote bag. And you'll notice I did not place pins along the top edge because I do need this to be an opening. So don't place pins there so that you don't accidentally sew that closed. Okay, so here we are at our final step for the pocket. We are going to now sew with an edge stitch around these 3 sides, starting from the upper right hand corner, pivoting here at the bottom 2 corners, and then back up to the top with a back stitch. Now to do an edge stitch, we are actually going to switch our presser foot to presser foot number 5, which is called the edge stitch foot. It looks like this, and it says number 5. It's kind of etched in the corner here, and you can find this in the presser foot box, and it's called the edge stitch. It's in the center compartment. Okay, you just want this foot part. Now to change your presser feet, I'm going to rotate this machine around so you can see the back of it. You're going to notice there's this red button here. If you press that, it's going to release the presser foot that you have on there. This is our standard presser foot. Okay, and there's different presser feet for different functions. And so for us, we want to use the edge foot. So you'll notice on this presser foot, there's this bar here. And basically what this does is it will clamp onto the arm of the presser foot, just like so. Okay, so what you're going to do is just put the presser foot down underneath where the presser foot normally would be. And then you're going to lower the presser foot using the presser foot lever over that bar so that it clamps onto it. And then when you lift up your presser foot again, it should lift the presser foot with it. Okay, and then as always, we always want our threads to run underneath the presser foot. So there's a tiny little slit here. You're just going to take the upper thread and run it through that slit in the middle. and then just leave it off to the back, just like that. Okay, we're ready to begin sewing. With this presser foot, you'll notice that there's a metal piece in the middle. You always have to move your needle position every time you sew with this presser foot, otherwise the needle might hit that metal piece and it might break your needle. So going over here to your needle position, we're gonna have to either move it to the far right or to the far left, depending on how we place our fabric in. So let's place our fabric in first and then decide which side we're gonna move our needle. Okay, so to place this into your machine, I'm starting in the upper right-hand corner of my pocket. Okay, I'm going to lower the presser foot so this metal piece right in the middle is lined up with my pocket edge. And you'll notice my pocket's on the left. So in this case, I'm going to move my needle position to the far left, because if I didn't, it would not catch my pocket pattern. So over here, moving it to the far left, you should see the dot over here. Okay, we can begin sewing. So as you're sewing, you're gonna notice that it's gonna sew really close to the folded edge. And you do wanna back stitch this. When I'm reaching the bottom here, just turn your hand wheel, get some control. As it's nearing the edge of it, you're gonna leave your needle in, lift up your presser foot and pivot. And if you notice that the metal piece is not lined up with the fabric here, mine's like a little off, so I could probably take one more stitch down. Okay, there, that's lined up much better. And as you're sewing, just double check that the stitch is actually catching the pocket. Because the stitch is really close to the edge, you want to make sure that it didn't come off your pocket. Okay, I'm nearing the corner again, so I'm just going to turn my hand wheel, lift up my presser foot. I could probably go one more stitch here. And at the top, don't forget to backstitch. Okay, trim off any loose threads. And also don't forget to replace the presser foot. So you can press that red button. This presser foot should drop down. You could replace it back to your original one. Lower the presser foot so it clamps back on that bar. And then return the presser foot number 5, so this one, back to the bin. Okay, so at this point your pocket sample is completely done. And just double check that the stitching did catch around these 3 sides. Okay, and the top should be open so that you can use it as an actual pocket.